Well, first things first. I know you're probably wondering why I'm naked. Well, that is a hackneyed metaphor for transparency. Um, and why the lampshade on my head? That would be what is known as humor, or psychologically uh, classified as deflection. Um, Now let's get on with the video. Hello to my wonderful patrons and anyone else watching who has somehow stumbled upon this video meant specifically for an informal club of only 40 people. This video is going to be a few things. Your poll responses, thank you, they were wonderful, and I learned so much. Also, what I did or didn't do in April and now in May. The larger scale projects I have been attempting to work on, psychological and philosophical questions leading to an attempt at a political economy of the rejection of production. It may spend some time in the future, speculatively. There will be personal and professional news. Every one of you have pre-existing personal relationships with me, save one. And I love and appreciate all of you, even my one patron who wasn't previously a friend or family member or close. In fact, that patron is so enthusiastic and supportive to a degree that I never thought my output could engender, and I really appreciate him. If I am brave enough, there might even be some confessions in here. So, here we go. Part 1, COVID economics. The economics of COVID-19 seem obvious, plain, understood. Everyone has taken a hit, has found their financial liquidity turning to gas, a small, weak fart. No one has money to waste on frivolities, yet it is somehow also easy to let slip from memory from an emotional standpoint. Easy to be so myopically and tightly focused on the hardship each one of us suffers in solitude that you somehow forget to empathize with the stories of others. No one has forgotten that nearly everyone is having a hard time, except fuck you billionaires. But it slips our minds to put oneself in others' shoes, or maybe no shoes, maybe barefoot, bank account empty, cannot even afford to have that lonely fly weekly buzzing out of an empty wallet, like in all of those old cartoons. I've actually found it comforting to be reminded of specific hardships that people I know or don't are experiencing. It puts my own in perspective. The pandemic started out with an extremely difficult suicidal depression for me, triggered by how extremely unbalanced the suffering of the poor would be, and was already at the beginning, and would continue or even exponentially grow. It took me moving to stay with a friend to stop me from getting caught in my habitual negative ruminations. It was one of the best coping strategies, and I give huge thanks to my temporary roommate, who should be watching this video. You know who you are? So thanks. I might not have made it if I hadn't moved in with that friend temporarily. I started the Patreon at that time. I beefed up my Bandcamp. I got a very interesting, stimulating, and for Berlin, well-paid job. It was only 10 hours a week, but these three things, along with the decision to begin liquidating all of my possessions, got me by financially. I'm a cockroach person, excelling at survival. It didn't last, though. Though I put out more than 200 songs in 2020, the sales slowed to a trickle. I make about €5 a month these days. My job sadly suddenly evaporated. It was a life raft to me, the only human contact I was getting. My bosses were, and still are, friends. I liked them a lot. Loss coincided with my putting the Patreon on hold to try and regroup, maybe address some of the terrible missteps or mistakes or conflicts or ghosts I was collecting. This left only my selling of my possessions, which was not a good thing. It is an almost laughably bad time to be a salesman, an identity which I do not want but find myself needing to be. Some of you may know that I have begun to sell my record collection. I have been buying records since I was approximately 8 years old. I have only sold them at one point in the past, At 15 or so, I tried to get rid of any of the records that I thought weren't cool enough for my burgeoning identity. The contrived jigsaw puzzle that said connoisseur on the box, but was a clumsy mix of punk, bebop, hepcat, rude boy mod, with sprinklings of so much other shit. I stupidly sold most of my Nirvana and Sex Pistols bootlegs, both I stupidly sold most of my Nirvana and Sex Pistols bootlegs, both suddenly not punk enough or underground enough, along with some of my comedy records and a smattering of the 60s pop I had. So you see, I did not take the decision to sell these things now in the past few years lightly. With the onset of the second lockdown, immediately no one bought anything anymore. I had been consistently having visitor/customers with extreme safety and helping to pay the rent. Sometimes it was my main income in a month. And it stopped short, grinding halt. Oh, that's a Cure song. At the moment, I live off of the charity of my mother and grandmother, and you, the patrons. At the height, I had 400 euros coming in from the Patreon, though it has since dropped to about 300. This is where I must remind myself of how much each and every one of you is also in economic danger, and to appreciate how giving all of you are, especially in light of how little I have been giving since April Fool's Day. I was a fool. Taking that month off wasn't just a financial hit, it was an emotional one. Doing the Patreon was stressing me out in a very bad way, or multiple very bad ways, but doing things for the Patreon had also been helping to keep my illness at bay. I had planned to do lots during that month off, but I did nothing, or barely nothing. I barely moved, in fact. I stopped keeping my apartment tidy, I rarely left the bed. Time off took away my motivation and my connection to the outside world. I broke. Part 2, my personal problems. So, it is impossible to get out of bed and conjure a podcast about enjoyment of wine when you are fully anhedonic. Anhedonia is the inability to feel or experience joy. And when you can't enjoy anything, nothing at all really matters. This concept or thought looms larger and is more seductive. It has caught you, has convinced you, you let it in your psyche and your house. It's not going anywhere. I have a problem with dopamine in my brain. I cannot produce enough. Or it isn't processed correctly. The exchange either in reuptake or sending from the right place to the correct destination, whatever is going on, it is very fucked. My norepinephrine isn't great either. Genetics, epigenetics, circumstances, 40 years of habits that worked to save me at some point in the past, but have become incredibly detrimental, and a ton of trauma, both from the past and fantastic. Here came some strutting in anew. These are all reasons or underpinnings. This is where I'm at right now. This is why I've fallen off the face of the internet. I am kind of stuck. And this isn't fair to all of you. This is why I decided to be honest and frank about my mental health and how it affects the patrons. My friends, my family members, my community, honestly. You guys, and I mean that gender non-specifically, I care that it affects you. I have a long history of therapy and psychiatry and growing up in a non-traditional family where things were often talked out extensively. I grew up partially in a collective. I grew up in San Francisco. I grew up bilingual and multicultural. And then I even created a chosen family in the Mission punk scene that was dysfunctional, but loving and so very helpful in helping me to cope with the disease I have. I've also experienced a lifetime of depression, with some harrowing points, honestly. And thankfully, because of all of these things put together, I have a ton of experience and strategies and understanding that I can use when the circumstances I am in are detrimental to my mental health. In fact, during the pandemic, I found myself talking to and teaching many friends to deal with the anxiety and depression that came with the isolation of the pandemic and lockdowns. Helping other people who had little or no experience or coping mechanisms with these things was one of the best things for my mental health in this time during the pandemic. Not only does it make one feel good to help and see a loved one leave a conversation happier and able to face the day, but it also really helped me see things that I was doing wrong myself. I had tons of coping strategies, but being a caretaker was suddenly much more weighty, relevant. It felt good. Part 3, Patreon and patronage. One of the things I was surprised to learn from the poll and all of the wonderful things everyone wrote to me was how overwhelmed by the amount of content I shared many people were. It came up a lot, actually. This was quite surprising. This is why communicating with patrons is important. I always felt I wasn't giving enough, actually, but it turned out that for many people, it was too much. I think the pandemic has made it so a lot of people feel inundated by information, stuck in isolation, or at least limited with our regular forms of communication. The version we had using social media and the internet in general felt like an onslaught. I would love to continue this conversation with all of you, actually. It certainly helped me understand why there was less engagement than I hoped for. It also felt good to know that I wasn't disappointing all of you, because that is something that I am insecure about. And that what I produced was often more than enough was a pleasant surprise. What does that mean for now, though? Well, this is the difficult part, because at the moment I am not psychologically or emotionally or in a way physically capable of providing the special things that are written on there, in the levels. I will try. This is not to say that they're gone, but I cannot guarantee anything at this point, which means, in a way, I am breaking our contract agreement as patron and recipient. So I wouldn't fault any of you for reducing your patronage or eliminating it altogether. I hope you do not, obviously. There are other things that I am working on, and maybe these will encourage all of you to continue with this little experiment. Next part, what are these big projects? I am in the process of writing 2 books. Right before the break I took, I suddenly had this manic explosion of an overly complicated idea for a book. It is actually 5 novellas that then make up one very large book or story. Each book has a different genre: sci-fi, mystery, war epic, memoir, and sort of freestyle. I'm not really sure. Each one of these is also the 5 stages of a novel story structure that's common: exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. Each one represents one of the commonly thought of stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. The milieu, the idea, the event, the character, the end. These are also styles of writing a story. Up until now, though, I was able to use a special writing application to build the world, the strands of it, the structure, the characters, the locations, and even some of the scenes and chapters. And I have written a few chapters as well. I have a friend who sort of read about this, and I'm just going to quote what he said. "This is big and intricate and possibly foolhardy. An idea that I'm really fascinated by, and I'm thinking that sharing some of the pieces with you, with my patrons, is a great idea. I hope that you agree." Here's the elevator pitch of the themes of the books. Meaning and survival, identity and autonomy, empathy and loss, destruction and interdependence, humanity and technology. The 5 stages of grieving, but not just for something that has happened or you've lost, but for all of humanity, for the impending, possibly inevitable ecological collapse, and the knock-on effects it will have on human society, which we choose not to describe here, as it is really kind of a book. Plus, a whole book about my breakup with my ex-girlfriend, because it is something that has driven a lot of problems I've had in my mind. The second book is one that you all have probably read some of it. A friend in the U.S. sort of challenged me to write my memoir, or a memoir, a while ago, and she would edit it. She is a published author and has edited 3 memoirs, if memory serves. Could have even been more. I need to do a lot of research and interviews, though, and not just randomly write things that suddenly come to my mind, even though those are quite fun and interesting. And I have found I can't really ask the editor to keep asking me more questions, which leads on to the next section. San Francisco and Berlin. I'm probably going to San Francisco on August 1st. I'm currently planning on returning to Berlin on April 1st. I'm not sure if I will be... I am not sure if I will be returning just to try selling my things or to live here again. Hopefully the pandemic will have wound down to some extent, or, for the most part would be ideal. Sadly, I doubt it, and, there will be longer effects. Since we keep up this capitalist patent bullshit, the global south will continue dying, and there will be more and more mutations coming along, and probably eventually leading to more waves or outbreaks or something. I'm sorry for being so grim, but here's the good news. I hope to take the opportunity of my being back in San Francisco to interview people from my past extensively. First, my family, of course, my mother and father and my brother and my grandmother, but also friends from my childhood, people from high school as well, and of course the loving and giving women who somehow fell for the con and were romantically entangled with me. Which means I may put up interview recordings, or there may be transcripts, or I might end up doing a lot more memoir excerpts that have a little bit more structure, or background, profiles of people from my life, videos, a podcast, who knows? What I'm trying to say is that the books might be a temporary replacement for the normal benefits of being a patron, and that I may leave Berlin forever, which I think a lot of people assumed would happen at some point. I also want to go back to doing all the things that I was doing before for the Patreon. This might return slowly, or perhaps one day I'll suddenly be better, which does happen sometimes. I am diagnosed with bipolar disorder type 2, which is mostly depression, but can sometimes have swings to mania, just less dissociative than the traditional manic depressive that most people know of. I'm just asking you to be patient, because I don't know what is coming for me, and I don't know what I can provide. I appreciate and love you all, and I am open to any of your feedback on all of this. And that's pretty much it. I want to say thank you. And I hope everyone is down. Ciao.